Could you explain where you were when you found out that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor?
I was listening to radio about 4 p.m. on December the 7th, 1941, and I heard it on a news clip.
Where were you living at the time?
I was at my home in, or my dad's home in Cook County, Texas, about 50 miles north of Dallas.
How old were you?
Old.
Mm-hmm.
I was 20.
Could you explain some of the emotions that you were feeling when you found out the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor?
No, not really. I, of course, had emotions about it, and soon after that, why, a lot of the boys that I knew, why, it was the #1 topic, and the question was, did we get drafted or do we volunteer?
What did you decide to do?
Well, I attempted to get in the Naval Air Force and also the Army Air Force, but I had a little eye problem that prevented me from doing that. And I volunteered in May of 1942 for the Navy.
Why did you decide to pick the Navy?
Well, I didn't think I wanted to be in the infantry, and the Navy was about the only thing left that I wanted. I looked at the Marines, but I didn't think I wanted that.
So, after you enlisted, could you maybe explain the sort of training you went through and what you ultimately were trained to do?
Okay. I done boot camp in San Diego, California. And from there I was picked to go to Aviation Mechanic School at Navy Pier, Chicago. And we spent about 7 months there. And then they come along and said, we need so many Aero Gunners, and we're looking for volunteers. So I volunteered for that. And from Chicago, I went to Hollywood, Florida. And we were built in an ex-military academy. And we shot skied every day for 30 days. And then we studied guns and ammunition, torpedoes, and all kinds of weapons. And from there we went to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and went into kind of basic training for pilots and air crew together. And I was there about 4 months. And then we went to a squadron. It was the starting of a squadron in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. And we did our basic training there that summer of '43, and we completed that about August of '43. And then we went aboard the U.S.S Cabot for a shakedown cruise and training there. And we went down to the Caribbean, South America. We're gone about 6 weeks on a shakedown. And then back to, we ended up at Quonset Point, Rhode Island. And there we spent about 2 or 3 weeks while some repairs were being made to the carrier and some of the loose ends tied up. And then from there we went through the canal over to Hawaii. And we spent a few weeks in Hawaii, and they were waiting on an operation which was the Marshall Islands invasion. And then from there we went to the Marshall Islands and made that combat, and that lasted about 2 weeks. And then we were back to Majuro Harbor, which was proved to be a large harbor with a lot of shipping coming and going, and a lot of carriers waiting on operations. And from there we bombed Truck Island on several occasions, and it was a real hornet's nest because it was the advanced base for the Southern Pacific for the Japanese.
Could you maybe explain some of your experiences at Truck? Could you maybe explain some of your experiences at Truck Island?
Okay.
What sort of missions you flew?
And but in the Marshall Islands, that was a fairly easy task. We didn't see too much any aircraft, and we didn't get hit in that operation. And we dropped bombs on fuel storage, ammunition dumps, and that was about it. And Truck Island was a real eye-opener for it, because that was the first real serious combat we'd made. And it was a real well laid out by nature harbor. It consisted of 5 islands, probably 8 or 10 miles across, into a lagoon. And these islands were fairly evenly spaced around this perimeter. And in the middle island, they had an airfield, a flat island. All the other islands were mountainous, fairly mountainous. And in that operation, we didn't lose any of our planes in our torpedo squadron, but the fighter group lost 3 planes. And then from there, the plans were to hit some lesser islands in the Central Pacific and get ready for the invasion of Tinian Island in the Marianas, which we needed for the B-29s to bomb Japan. And we spent about 3 weeks bombing, strafing, and a lot of things along that line in that area on Tinian and Saipan. And during this time, we had a submarine picket along the Philippines, Singapore, down in that country. And we got word from them there was a large fleet of Japanese Navy pulling out of that area and organizing. And our Admiral Mechner pretty well guessed at what was coming, and he wanted the submarine to keep daily tab on the Jap fleet, and for us, information for us as to what we would do. Well, about a week later, another force joined the Japanese, and they were headed toward Saipan Island. In the meantime, we had planned to invade Guam after we finished with Citation. And he decided to hold up that Guam operation until this thing blew over. And we formed two lines, picket line, west of Hawaii. And each one had two carriers. And as the Jap fleet moved in closer to us, why, he had it figured out as to what they would do. They would hit us and try to land on Guam and then refuel and go back aboard their carriers. And this is what happened. They hit us one morning, and they had about 400 planes off of 5 carriers. And we knew at that time through prisoners that had been picked up that they had people who didn't have a lot of flying experience. They were green. And that morning our crew was on patrol, and a submarine patrol. And we were in the sector that the Japanese came in on. But our ship's radar picked them up at about 150 miles. And they estimated 300 or 400 planes. And there were a lot of good dogfights went on there. We moved out of their way and let them have it. But that particular day, the Japanese lost 390 planes, about 390 planes, and we lost about 42. And most of those were fighter planes.
Did you see any of the dogfights in the area?
Yep. Saw 7 parachutes at one time, drifting down.
What was your impression when you were looking around? Do you remember anything sticks in your mind after all this time about that?
Oh, no, it was a pretty good air show.
Yeah.
I guess you could say, of course, we were out of danger, really, and we had orders not to interfere unless they come in close to us. But that thing settled down about noon that day, and the messenger wanted to catch the Jap fleet. So we barreled toward them as hard as we could go. And about 4 o'clock the next afternoon, we'd been assigned 7 planes if and when we caught them to be in that flight. Well, we had just gone on at 4 o'clock, and about 4 or 5, we got word from a PBY scout plane that they'd sighted them. Of course, we were loaded with bombs, and all we carried were bombs, whereas some of the other ships carried torpedoes. And we took off. Well, it was getting pretty late, and we had too many miles to cover. And the fleet turned, of course, coming after us because they could cut down, say in 4 hours, well, they could cut down 150 miles of our flight. Well, we hit sight the Jap fleet. Sun was about 15 minutes high, I guess, and we run on, our group run on, 4 of our group run on this aircraft carrier. And we got some good hits, got a good fire started, but it didn't go down.
Could you explain your torpedo run? I mean, what?
Yeah.
Or your bomb
run?
We
were carrying 400 or 500 pound bombs each.
Could you explain what it's like? Were you dive bombing?
Yeah, we were glide bombing.
Could you explain?
See, the dive bomber went straight in, and we glided. And Of course, we headed back to the fleet because we knew we were real close on fuel. And we had about 140 planes in all. And about half of those were fighter planes, and the other half was split between dive bombers and torpedo bombers. Well, before we got back to our fleet, of course it went dark and there wasn't any moon. And we had a few people that we knew had never actually done a combat landing at night on an aircraft carrier. And the Admiral broke radio silence and broadcast on the radio that when we were about 20 or 30 miles out, while they would turn on the lights, which was pretty dangerous if there was any submarines around. So they went ahead and done that, and all the last 15, 20 minutes while there were several fighters said, I'm going in because I'm out of gas. And we landed about 9:45 that night aboard the aircraft. Got on real good, no problem. We had one plane that went in the water, and we had another one that landed aboard the Bunker Hill, another aircraft carrier, and they made a bad landing, killed 14 deck crew, and they had a fire, and the pilot got burned bad, and he died about a year later. The other two were okay. But that was about the wildest night I ever spent out there, I guess. And after that, why, of course, they went ahead as planned with the landings on Guam to secure it. And that went according to schedule from that point. And we did a lot of bombing on Guam. We done napalm bombs. And that was a wicked weapon.
Could you explain?
We dropped it in those caves, you know, that the Japanese had gun mounts in on those islands. And well, what they did was snuff out all the oxygen. And whoever might be there died. And from that point on, why we started work around Iwo Jima. And of course nobody knew what Iwo Jima consisted of, really. But we were up there one day, and there was a high wind, low-level wind, and all of that grit, lava, all of that dust was blowing. You couldn't see the deck. I mean, you couldn't see the ground. And we dropped our bombs that day. We got a pretty good drop. And then we bombed it several times after that. See, they didn't land there until February 45. And this all took place about June, July, and August of 44. And from there, we made a run down to New Guinea. And they were getting ready to take a couple of places down there. And one was Hollandia. That was the biggest operation, I guess. And it lasted about a week. And then from there, we come back up and made 3 runs up and down the Philippines. And we bombed, torpedoed, and what have you. See, the Dutch Shell Oil Company had a refinery on Los Negros in the Philippines. And the Japs still had control of it. They were getting fuel there. So we wanted to take it out. And we did. We bombed all the storage tanks and their operation part of the plant.
Was it quite a show? I mean, you were the rear turret gunner, correct?
Right.
You were the rear turret gunner, so you could probably have a pretty
Yeah.
good view of the effect of your bombs.
We bombed and then strafed. Pilot would drop his bombs and roll the plane over, and then we'd strafe. You had a radioman and a turret gunner.
So they're a three-man crew?
Yeah. And we done quite a bit of strafing. Sometimes you couldn't, it wasn't practical. You just wasted ammunition, you know. Mm-hmm. And in that deal at what they call the Battle of the First Battle of the Philippine Sea, mm-hmm. We, the pilots, 4 pilots involved, got the Navy Cross for that operation, and the crews got Distinguished Flying Cross. And I don't know what the submariners got, but I think the highest medal that they could get was the Presidential Unit Citation. See, that was given to a group. It wasn't really an individual medal.
What? Why did your group receive these citations? What sort of things did you do in the first Battle of Philippine Sea?
Well, because we helped sink the carrier. That was the reason for the citations.
Interesting. So your plane was part of the bomb run to help sink that carrier?
Yeah.
Could you see your bombs hitting it because of your position in the plane?
Yeah, we had a good fire. Started to see, I faced the aft mm-hmm. of the plane. Mm-hmm. And as we dropped our bombs, they come out. Just before that, like 3 fighters tried to jump us. And another gunner and I, he said we got one. I don't know, I couldn't see.
But you were shooting at it. It was definitely on your tail.
But he said we got one. But there wasn't very many of them because they lost all their planes the day before. Mm. And that really hurt them.
Now, you went up your bomb run. I mean, there must have been a lot of flak. Was your plane getting knocked around quite a bit?
Well, they never really come in on us that day as far as shooting at us. Of course, we were shooting at them, and 2 of them never come in at all. Just one made a feeble attempt to come in, and this buddy of mine, he was in the bottom section of the flight, and he could see better than I could after a point. And he said we got one there, and possibly got another one. So that's what the Distinguished Flying Cross would give for partially.
Interesting.
And one crew went in the water, and the pilot got knocked out, and the other 2 drug him out. They got a Silver Star for that. Hmm. And the Peaceful on other carriers, I don't know what they got out of the deal in the way of medals.
So was the first Battle of Philippine Sea, was that the last major battle you were in? The first Battle of the Philippine Sea, was that the last major battle you were in?
Well, I guess maybe you'd say major battle. Mm-hmm. However, in August of 1944, we had word that there was quite a fleet of Japanese ships, warships, in the harbor there. And we were within about 300-400 miles at the time. So we raced up there one night, and I believe there were 5 planes from our ship assigned to that job, and there was about 70 or 80 planes total from other carriers. And I was flying with the skipper of the Air Group 31, and he was a good pilot. he come in and he always went in first. He didn't ask anybody else to lead as long as he was flying in the group. And he dropped his torpedo and got a good hit. And the destroyer, it was a large destroyer, and it heaved up out of the water and broke in half. But it was anchored in that harbor.
Which harbor was this? In the Philippines?
Chichijima.
Chichijima, okay.
But we lost one crew during that deal. And I didn't see anybody go down, because it was partially cloudy, a little foggy, raining a little bit. But after that, another plane from the Yorktown said that he saw a torpedo bomber go down. And it had to be them, you know, because they never showed up. And they were captured. They made a fairly good water landing and were captured. After the war, the pilot, he said, I'm going to find out what happened to those fellows. And he wrangled some kind of position in naval intelligence. And he attended the war crime trials. And they found out that all three of them were beheaded.
Jeez.
And that solved that problem. And we did a lot of bombing in the Philippines. And the southern Philippines, we burned out a village down there. I don't know how big it was or how many people it would have held, but supposedly the Japanese run all the people off and killed them, I suppose, part of them, and occupied the village. And we dropped napalm bombs on them, and it burned it up. So nobody was able to use that for some period of time. And we dropped mostly 500-pound bombs on, there were ammunition dumps.
Could you explain the plane you flew in? Could you just kind of detail some of the
Well,
facts
we
about
had
it?
good intelligence.
Okay.
The Marines had two B-24s, and they were photographic planes. And we had some good pictures of all of that country, from tip of New Guinea north to Japan. And they done a lot of reconnaissance work. And we had sectional maps of what we were supposed to bomb. If you couldn't get to that spot, somebody had already beat you to it, then you had alternates. And it worked reasonably well. And in Manila, we done quite a bit of bombing in Manila, in that area. And our group, we never reached Japan. We were in late December where we were relieved. Another group took our place. And then we come home on the first of the year in 1945. And
I mean, like you
but all
were you discharged in 1945?
exciting.
Were you discharged? Were you discharged the first of the year in 1945? Okay, you just came home.
I came back to the States in late 44. And 45 I got assigned to outfit at Ream Field, California, down at Chula Vista, California, right on the border. And we found out, another fellow and I found out that they were getting ready to go to sea. We just left out there. So we went up and talked to the CEO and told him the story. He said, well, if you fellows don't want to fly anymore, I'll send you to San Diego. So we went over to San Diego and we got in a ground crew mechanics and worked there about 4 months. And then one night, the chief that we got to know pretty good, he come around and told us, said, "Say, you fellas want to move?" So, no, where were we going? And he says, "There's a little naval air base near Long Beach, California." And they said it's the best little base in the Navy. And we got a want for 2 mechanics up there. And he said it'd be good duty. We told him, okay, sign us up. And we went up there, and I stayed there the remainder of the war.
Was it good duty?
Anyway, it was good duty, it sure was. And I hope we done some good, but we were signed to squadrons that were getting ready to go out to sea. They were finishing up their last training. And we talked to them about an hour a day, what we'd seen, and things to watch for, things that could happen to you. And that's about all we did, except be sure that the planes that they were using got required maintenance.
Now, you spoke earlier about the Japanese pilots were green, and that you slaughtered them in the battle in the Marianas.
Yep.
And then later, you come home, and they're able to take an experienced guy like you to help train these pilots. At that point, did you know that the Japanese were licked because we were able to do things like that?
Well, we knew that they were in trouble. Fuel-wise, that was one of the big things we knew, because, you know, you can strafe an airplane with a full tank of gas and you get a good flare-up. And if that tank is empty, you get an explosion. And many of these airfields that we were bombing, up and down the Philippines, New Guinea, down in that area, that's what we saw.
Explosion.
So we knew that they were hurting for fuel. Also, well, we picked up this Japanese pilot, and he had only 60 hours flying time from day one, you know. And he hadn't had much training. And about all they were good for was what they finally did, and that'd make kamikazes out of them. But they just didn't have they wouldn't run on us there in the last months. If there was more than one plane, they wouldn't tackle us. So it was a matter of they were running out of supplies. And that's really, that would have, I don't know whether it would, but someday down the road it would probably end the war if they had changed it all, but they wouldn't surrender. They expected to die. And they were surprised when you interrogated them that you didn't shoot them afterward.
Well, do you mind if I ask you some questions about some things that you told me earlier?
Yeah.
First off, your first combat mission. Could you describe to me how you felt and what the mission was?
Well, I felt I wasn't apprehensive about it, or we'd been trained, you know, and we'd had emergencies along the way in training, and I think most of us took it a day at a time, and we didn't think too much about it. But we had 3 people that knew that they weren't coming back, and none of the 3 come back. So whether they had premonition, I don't know, but they knew something evidently. One fellow gave a buddy of mine a $1 bill. Said, "This is all the money I've got." And they were going on the flight. And that I won't need this anymore. And he got shot out.
Wow.
So, but it never did bother me very much. I figured that if I got shot out, I would make it back somehow. Kind of the way I looked at it.
What was the probably the hairiest or most frightening moment that you experienced during all these attacks and bombing runs? Were there any missions that were particularly more dangerous than others?
Well, I would say the night that we had to come in and land on the carrier, because so many planes hitting the water, and our tank was empty. Our motor died when they were putting us in the parking area.
So could you see them turn the lights on, or did you just go over there?
Yeah, they turn the border lights on the deck of carrier. When you get in the right position, why it shows up just like a neon sign. You can see that carrier deck real well. And they had those on, and they had some searchlights on, which was, if I'd have been mixer, I don't know whether I'd done that or not, but he gambled, and there wasn't any subs in the area.
Would you have been able to land if they had not turned the lights on?
What?
Would you have been able to have landed if they had not turned the lights on? Would you have found something?
We might have. I don't know. Like I say, the moon wasn't shining. That was a number one deal. And you can't see those carriers hardly unless you've got in the wake. Sometimes you have a phosphorus action, and you can follow a ship just right on down the road.
Really?
If that's occurred. And I think it's in certain waters that this happens. And we had a Jap torpedo plane hit us one night. There was 4 carriers and about 12 destroyers. And they didn't hit us, but they hit the Intrepid. That was a CV. And I know that they could see that wake because you could look at our wake and you could see it just plain as daylight. So that was one of these things that probably doesn't happen too often, but it does happen.
Was your ship, the Cabot, ever hit or attacked while you were on board?
The which?
Was your ship, the Cabot, ever hit or attacked while you were on board?
No, we got some real near misses. And, well, I'd say we got a slight hit. It was a real close miss. It didn't damage us much. But after I left the ship, I guess that was about May 45, when they were taking Okinawa. That's when they took a kamikaze. That's when the Bunker Hill nearly got sunk. That deck looked like a junkyard. I saw the ship before they started working on it.
In harbor?
I mean, it was butchered up. And they lost a lot of people in those deals. But we were lucky that the one that we took, we lost about 70 people, I think. And most of those were the Japanese planes sheared the starboard side of the ship, just kind of come down that way, and the 40 millimeter gun mounts. And there was about 7 men per gun mount. And it took all them off. They all went to sea. They didn't recover any of them.
Wow.
It was a close call on things like that, But we had our gunners knocked down about 12 of those kamikaze planes. And then the fighter planes, of course, they flew patrol, and they got a lot of them. But a few of them got through.
Was your plane ever damaged by fighters while you were flying a mission? Were you ever attacked, and was your plane ever damaged by Zeros?
Well, yeah, we got some strafing on our deck. See, the carrier has a wooden deck set in a metal retainer, like, and the wood's about 3 feet thick, and it's cut into 4-foot joints, and they'll go anywhere. I mean, you can put one anywhere and it'll fit on that deck, and they can change out 400 or 500 square feet of that and nothing flat, because it's already cut, stacked, ready.
How about your the plane that you flew on? Was it ever attacked by Japanese fighters? Your aircraft?
Well, like I say, I got credit for 1.5 planes, and this other old boy, he got credit for 1.5 planes.
Yeah.
So we got 3 between us.
Awesome.
And then how much damage we did, I know a lot of times that we damaged planes.
So could you see your tracers hitting the plane?
Yeah, you could see the bullets hit the target a lot of times
And you
if
could see
the
it.
sun was right, and those things. And a lot of times they were too far out, but I'd throw a few bursts out there to see what they do, you know. And sometimes they'd run on us, sometimes they wouldn't. We had 7 one morning that run on us in the Philippines. And I don't know what their idea was. There was, I believe it was 9 planes in our flight, and we had 9 turrets there. So we started spraying them with turrets, you know, and they flew right on through us. Never did see them again. So they were making a fast hit, I guess. But there's a lot of things like that happen, you know.
Yeah.
That they were kind of maybe unusual, but there again, we had a fighter got after us one day, and we went into a thunderhead, and we messed around in there 30 minutes. Come out, we never did see him. He gave it up, left. But there's all kinds of deals, you know. We had one fellow that had perpetual seasickness, and they were going to move him to another job on land. But one night he decided, we were anchored, he decided he'd swim home.
So that's it, huh?
You know, I don't know whether he was a little off or not, but then they moved him.
Okay.
Yeah, they got a place for him, and we never did know what happened to him. Never saw him again.
Wow.
But we had things that happened that you wouldn't think, you couldn't see how it happened that way. We had a torpedo plane made a run on us one day, and there were 3 carriers and some destroyers, a battleship in the fleet, and that plane come clear through the fleet and didn't get knocked down. All those ships were really pouring the lead at it. He come over our carrier, he wasn't over 40 feet high, I guess, and the gunners, they were letting him try and knock him down, and they never did knock him down. Fighter plane finally picked him up on the edge of the fleet and got him. But you know, things like that. Well, it's hard to figure. You take, we made about 50 soul bombing runs, combat runs, and we never got a scratch, the 3 of us. We picked up a lot of holes in the plane, things like that, but we never got anything that was fatal, and managed to fly it back. And we had a crash landing aboard ship one time.
Oh, really?
And we landed. There's 7 cables and a barrier where you land. Number 3 or 4 cable is the one you want, is the best one. And our hook, the carrier was rolling and pitching quite a bit that day. And our hook got in a rhythm, bounced over one of those wires. And the fellow who was operating the barrier thought we had a wire, and he had dropped the barrier. So we went right on through and hooked our starboard wing on the island of the carrier, and we spun us around into 40mm gun mount. And we were sitting there, boy, it was touch and go. We figured if we moved, the plane would go in the water.
So you were on the edge of the ship?
Yeah, we were right on the edge of the deck, you know. But they got us out of there and then pushed the plane over the side because it was banged up pretty good. But we didn't, we went through the war and none of us ever got hit, which I thought was pretty remarkable due to the fact we did pick up holes in our planes quite often, something that really wasn't unusual.
The bombing run on that carrier, you got to distinguish flying cross 4 or service cross?
Yeah.
Do you remember the name of that carrier that you sunk or that you helped sink? Do you recall that? It's okay if you don't, I'm just curious.
Let's see, there was the Nagallo. I'd have to get it out of, I've got a history book that was written about the Cabot, U.S.S Cabot. I could get it out of there, I think.
I was just curious. And you know, when someone watches, you know, the movies of these bombing runs, you always see the plane being knocked around and all that. Is that a true representation? Could you kind of tell us what a bombing run on a naval vessel is really like?
Well, that was really the most dangerous part of bombing. Because on land, your guns, the enemy guns, were dispersed. Whereas in a fleet, while they were jammed together, and boy, I mean, they throw the firepower if you happen to get in. And I really don't know, you know, you see these pictures of the dive bombers bombing ships like the Battle of Midway and those things. I saw one dive bomber get shot down. And I saw one that a wing come off the plane. It was the only 2 real fatalities that I ever saw in that position. Now, when you're running on those fleets, you've got such a screen coming at you that I think luck plays a lot of big part of it. Like those boys up there, you know, Anson Gay, you've heard of him. He was just lucky. And all the other fellas got shot down in that squadron, Torpedo 8. And I consider the 3 of us real lucky. Because I think we had to have some luck because we made, you know, bombing runs, torpedo runs, and managed to stay together and get back.
One last question about your time in the theater. You mentioned a number of times that you would do, was it close air ground support? Did you ever do close air ground support for our ground troops? Or was it mostly bombing runs to soften up positions?
We drop bombed ahead of the Marines when they were making landings. We used what they call anti-personnel bombs. And they were just a junk bomb filled with nuts and bolts and went off about waist high. That's what they were, anti-personnel, what they were for. We did that quite a bit, and sometimes, well, like Guam, for instance, we got a call one day. We were in the vicinity. We dropped bombs, but we didn't have any bombs left. But we had all of our ammunition. And there were several other planes the same fix. The Marines had a group of Japanese kind of hemmed up against the cliffs. But the Japanese evidently had somewhat, whether it's a mortar or what, I don't know, but they were giving them a bad time, and they called for support. And we went in and strafed. The pilots had 250 caliber, I had 50 caliber, and the gunner, the radio man had a 30 caliber. And there's 4 or 5 planos went in there and strafed. In a minute, well, we got a call thanking us. And that's the way it went, you know, on some of those deals. And we were down in New Guinea, and let's see, I can't think of the name of that island now. But anyway, it was off of the north quadrant of New Guinea. And these fellows had moved in on the beach, but they were in a sector that they weren't supposed to be in at that time of day. And I know that we killed some of them because we went in there and strafed and found out later that they had moved into that area. And those things happen.
Yeah.
Like there was quite a bit of animosity between the submariners and the flyers.
Really?
Because the submarine got hit occasionally with a friendly bomb. That happened.
Interesting.
But it didn't happen as many times as I would figure it would happen, you know, because you knew where everybody was supposed to be at certain times of the day. And this was checked out frequently. And unless you didn't get the information, or you got it garbled, why you didn't have much of a chance of hitting them, but it happened.
Well, you've mentioned your crew a few times.
Uh-huh.
What was the relationship like with your crew?
Well, it's kind of like I asked the pilot one time when we first started flying together. See, we flew together about 20 months.
Oh, okay.
And I said, what do you want me to call you? He said, well, when we're on ship, you can call me Mr. Woods. I said, with an airplane, well, you can just call me anything. And so that's kind of the way it went, you know. But we had a real good crew. I would bet that we had as good a crew as the one in the Pacific, because we knew each other's weaknesses, strong points, and we could talk to one another, and it worked, you know, for us.
Did you keep in touch with any of your? Did you keep in touch with any of them after the war?
Yes, I belong to the Association of the Aircraft Carrier and the 2 squadrons that served aboard there during the war. And we have a get-together every year since 1980. But unfortunately, the pilot, he died in 97, and the radio man died in 92. And we were all the same age. The pilot was a year older than I was, and I was a year older than the radio man. And we got along, you know. So some of those crews didn't get along too good because for one reason, see, the pilot was an officer, and the crews most of the time were enlisted people, and they wanted their crew to know that they were officers.
That's what you're saying.
And there was some of that went on, but we didn't have any problem along that line. It's just like he said, we called him Mr. aboard the ship.
But up in the air, it was whatever.
Yep, that's right.
Did you have a chance to go on leave at all while you're in the Pacific?
Or
Did you have a chance to go on leave while you were in the Pacific? Were you able to go visit any of the islands?
no, I didn't get on any land after I left Honolulu.
Interesting.
We escorted the Intrepid back when she took a fish out there around Truck Island to Honolulu for repairs. And outside of that, we weren't in. The whole time we were out there, we were moving around somewhere else. We refueled at sea, and usually we could take on supplies in a lagoon somewhere.
What about, do you recall the end of the war and VJ Day? Do you recall the end of the war and where were you?
Yeah, I was at Los Alamitos. That was this little Navy base around Long Beach. I was there. I remember very well.
What were your emotions? How did you feel?
Well, we'd talked about all of this when we were waiting on flights to come back in. We'd be resting under the wing of an airplane, you know, or something. And somebody would say what they were going to do when they got home, got discharged. And somebody would say, well, how do you know when you're going to get discharged? Say, well, it'll end someday, you know. And but most people, there was a lot of celebration went on that night.
Okay.
Around Long Beach there. And then another fellow went out and had a few beers. We didn't stay long. We'd come back in because they're getting pretty wild places. But I was ready to get out because I'd been in 3.5 years.
So when were you discharged? Shortly thereafter? Or?
Yeah, I got discharged about 2 weeks after the war was over. I had enough points to get discharged.
And what did you go on to do after the war?
I went back home. My wife, we'd married during the war, and she lived in Weatherford, Texas. And I went back there, and we messed around for a month or so, you know. I'd save some money. And my folks lived about 75, 80 miles north of there. And we went up, saw them. Then I got me a job, just kind of a survival job. Didn't make much money. I was working for the Texan Pacific Railway. And I had it about 5 or 6 months, I guess. And then I went to work for an old boy. He was buying surplus office machines. You know, they had this war surplus deal then, and you could bid on all this surplus stuff. And he bought about 4,000 typewriters and ad machines while I worked for him. And we repaired them. I knew a little about it because I'd done some of it beforehand. But I worked there a while, and then there's an old boy wanted me to go to work for him that run a typewriter and ad machine company. And there again, I wasn't making the money I wanted to make. And I worked for him about a year, I guess. And then one day I was walking down the street in Fort Worth, Texas. And I saw a fellow across the street I thought I'd ought to know. I went over and looked at him closer, and I knew who he was. He was a school teacher that had taught me years before in high school. And I said, what are you doing this neck of the woods? He said, well, I'm on a hiring expedition. He said, I work for the Celanese Chemical Company. And so I'm located in Bishop, Texas, and I'm looking for people. And he said, you wouldn't be interested, would you? I said, well, I might be. He said, well, you got to have 5 years experience or 2 years college. And I had the college. So I went over and talked to him. He was at the employment office. And he had me fill out some papers, you know. He said, if you pass physical, you're hired. So I went down, took the physical, went to worked for him 37 years.
Nice.
I retired in '82 out here at the Pampa plant. And that was a good job. Well, I managed to work my way up into a pretty good job the last 20 years I worked. And pretty good retirement. And able to save a little money. So I made the best choice there, I think.
How did your service during World War II affect your life? Or I should say, how did your experiences during World War II affect what you did later in life?
Oh, I'll tell you, the railroads, I think, done a wonderful job in World War II. I rode the railroads a lot. But those people moved a lot of goods and people. I mean, it's amazing. It was amazing to me that they could move that much material in that length of time, you know. And also, the people in cities. Chicago was the best liberty town I ever hit. Up there, you could